Okay, so because of that, the DMF has gone through some overhaul, and I thought, this is one of those things I thought was just going to be super simple. We're just going to add a couple things and whatever, and it ended up being like months of discussion. But here's how we've kind of adapted the decision-making framework to go with that concept of using the fieldbook as our tool. And so we've changed some of the headings. You can see under observations, for example. Observe. And what we've done is in sort of a action-oriented verbiage and try to keep it a little bit more consistent. So little subtle differences there. Observe avalanche, snowback weather. Identify patterns and trends. So we asked ourselves, what are we actually doing? And then we'll tell them to do it. And then underneath the line there are the tools that are in the fieldbook toolbox that we are going to use. And there's a couple things there that have new names. So we have understanding field observations. Formerly was called the observations checklist. And I'll go into a little bit why we changed the name. Not much else changed really on that. The field observations page. Guess which part, which tool that is?
Today's weather and field observations.
Yeah, what was formerly in your book called Today's Weather and Field Observations, or whatever that said, is now just simplified to Field Observations page. Okay, and it's a place to record the field observations. And then we have the trip planning process, review observations and human factors, evaluate terrain travel options, plan emergency response, the things that we're doing. And then you have the pre-trip hazard forecast checklist, which that name is slightly changed, but I think you know what that is, right? It's that left-hand side in the field book. This planning tool is one of the focuses in the toolbox, of what's in the toolbox. This is what sets people up in this trip planning process. This is what helps us emphasize the trip planning process. And if you notice, it's a forecast, so it's done in a group meeting in the morning. And it's a checklist. And what we're doing is trying to use checklists, because we've identified that checklists are actually something that's useful in operations. We'll talk more about that. And then the human factors, assess the team. So basically you're going to do a group profile, just like we've already been teaching people. You're going to identify the strengths and the weaknesses of the group. That's sort of where we come up with, so what are the potential human factor issues that we have, or concerns, or things that may affect our decision making out there. And then promote discussion and build consensus. So that's to remind people of basically how to approach that as a team. And then we have a new tool. It's nothing too fancy. It's called Human Factor Solutions. And I'll go into it a little bit more in a minute, but it's basically, the concept here is really cool, because we spent a lot of time in our courses in the past identifying the problem, identifying the human factor problem, and we haven't really offered much for solutions. So we now are focusing it on, what we're doing is we're identifying the traps, the common human factor traps, and then we are putting forth the human factor solutions, which is the type of behavior and things to do that will help basically this whole DMF and keeping it objective, keeping it on track. And then you can see a couple little catchphrases for terrain selection: identify options, reassess decisions, evaluate consequences, and with travel techniques, take action to further reduce risk. And again, this is from input from a lot of you guys. But adding those little captions, what it allowed us to do was, you know how you might relate to this, where you're trying to teach the DMF, and then you're like, how long does it take you to actually get the DMF across to the student? Like maybe 23 hours or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So
2 years.
What this is trying to do is make this a little bit more self-explanatory. So when you open the field book and you look at this, especially if you've been introduced to it, then you can kind of understand it without as much explanation and instruction, that kind of thing. And if you have the actual field book tools and you go through them, like we're telling them to do now, a little bit more, then it just kind of enacts the DMF automatically. And they don't have to know exactly what this means, what to do first, how to do it. That's all part of the field book. And then the student manual is the instruction manual for using the field book to enact the DMF. When you're out in the field, in your professional context, is there anybody here who does not document field observations? How about you, Margaret?
To be honest, in the guiding context, I usually document it when it supports the goals of the day, which usually means that it's a more complicated decision making and I'm less certain about it.
Okay, there you go. So when it's more complicated, when I'm less certain, okay? Part of our curriculum is identifying the fact that your beginner student, your level 1 student, is going to be less certain, and it's always going to be complicated, right? So we're teaching them to do exactly what we do when we feel like that. And that's really where the field book comes into play. When we think about the fact that the DMF is supposed to represent this sort of professional approach, to not use a field book when we would use a field book, we have to ask ourselves why that might be. So the field, again, that makes the point that the field book's very important. Well, I mean, I think what we want to recognize in our curriculum is that the debrief process actually, and the PM analysis, is actually pretty standard in a lot of professional avalanche observations. And one of the reasons for it is to analyze the decisions of the day to help with the next day's decisions. And a lot of these guys might be going on consecutive days, or they might just be going the next weekend, or whatever it may be. And so it'll help their decision making next time if they debrief today. And it's also to reflect on, hey, how were our decisions today? What errors may we have made? What human factors were playing a role in our decisions? Did we just get lucky today? So those kinds of things, like in our guide training that we do at the American Mountain Guides Association, we ask guides in training to ask themselves, when were you at most risk today? I mean, just that kind of reflection can be really valuable, not only from improving decision making over time, which this whole curriculum is meant not just to improve your decision making instantly, but to continue to improve on a curve your decision making over time. But also, so that you can you can learn to self-evaluate and have this be a more useful tool for you. Does that all make sense? So, and we're using the field book as a way to record and get those things set.